The canyon walls, trapped, sound like a coffin trap's breath. Lieutenant Commander Jake Brennan pressed his back against the jagged rock face, feeling the heat of stone that had baked under the Afghan sun all day. Around him, his 7-man SEAL team was scattered across 15 meters of hell, each man pinned behind whatever cover they could find when the ambush erupted. Contact left, contact front. Petty Officer Derek Hutchinson's voice cracked through the chaos, his M4 spitting fire at shadows that multiplied with every second. They'd walk straight into a kill box. The intelligence said 12 hostiles, maybe 15. Light resistance, quick in, quick out. The intelligence was garbage. Brennan counted muzzle flashes. 20, 25, 30. They came from 3 different elevations. A coordinated L-shaped ambush that demonstrated training far beyond the usual insurgent rabble. RPG, someone screamed. The rocket-propelled grenades streaked past, impacting the canyon wall behind them. Stone fragments became shrapnel, peppering Brennan's plate carrier. His ears rang, but he could still hear the wet cough from Corpsman Tyler Graves, who'd taken fragments to his side. "Graves is hit. Need to move him." That was Chief Petty Officer Marcus Aldridge, his voice steady despite the storm of bullets chewing up their position. But there was nowhere to move. The insertion point was 200 meters behind them, up a narrow choke point now swept by enemy fire. Forward was a dead end. The canyon terminated in a sheer cliff face. They were boxed in on 3 sides, with only the sparse cover of fallen boulders between them and a firing line that seemed to stretch the entire ridgeline. Brennan keyed his radio, forcing calm into his voice even as rounds sparked off the rock inches from his head. "Overwatch, this is Razor 1. We are pinned down. Coordinates. We know your position, Razor 1. The response came from their distant command post, frustratingly safe. "Extract team is 30 minutes out." 30 minutes. They wouldn't last 30 seconds if the enemy decided to rush their position. Another RPG. This one closer. The concussion wave slamming Brennan against the rock, his vision blurred, ears screaming, a high-pitched whine that drowned out everything except the primal understanding that they were about to die. He looked across the gap to where Aldridge had dragged Graves behind a boulder. The corpsman's hands were red, pressed against his own side. Petty Officer Ryan Sawyer was with them, changing magazines with mechanical precision even though his left arm hung limp, blood darkening his sleeve. "Coming over the ridge," Hutchinson shouted. "I count Jesus Christ, I count." "So F times, cacking many." The words tore from Brennan's throat before he could stop them, raw and desperate as he watched the ridgeline come alive with silhouettes. Not a few, not a dozen, dozens. A full assault wave preparing to sweep down and end this. He keyed the radio again, no longer caring about protocol or proper communications procedure. Any station, this is Razor 1. We are about to be overrun. 30+ hostiles. There. Static crackled. Then a voice. Female. Calm as a surgical cut. "Razor 1, this is Shadow Viper. I have eyes on your position." Brennan's breath caught. The name was legend, whispered in team rooms and debriefed missions. The sniper who wasn't supposed to exist. The ghost who'd saved 3 different units in the past 18 months, then vanished from every official record. "Viper?" he managed. "You're real? Hold your position, Commander. I'm going to work." Her real name was erased from every database 3 years ago. The woman who now existed only as Shadow Viper in encrypted communications was officially dead, killed in a training accident, buried with honors, mourned by a family who'd been told comfortable lies. The truth was buried deeper than any grave. Her name had been Captain Sarah Blackwood, Marine Scout sniper, decorated, respected, one of the first women to pass the grueling course and earn the reputation through blood and precision. But Captain Blackwood died the day her 6-man team was left behind in Syria, abandoned when politics changed faster than extraction orders could be issued. She'd been the only one to walk out of that valley. The others, Sergeant Miles Hartford, Corporal Jackson Reed, Lance Corporal Emma Sterling, their names were carved into her memory deeper than any memorial wall. She'd carried Reed's body for 3 miles before the wait, and the enemy fire forced her to leave him. She'd held Sterling's hand as the life drained from the 19-year-old's eyes, whispering lies about medevac being close. When she finally reached friendly lines, covered in their blood and her own, something broke inside her that no amount of counseling or ceremony could fix. Jae-sok found her 6 months later. Not the woman who'd testified tearfully before closed-door committees, but the other version, the one who'd started taking contracts with private firms, the one who'd put 3 bullets through a warlord's skull from 1,400 meters out. Payment negotiable. They gave her a choice: prison for unauthorized operations, or become something else entirely. Something useful, something that didn't exist. Shadow Viper was born in that windowless room at Fort Bragg. No rank, no official unit, no paper trail. Just a ghost who deployed ahead of operations, provided overwatch no one requested, and disappeared before debriefs could include her in reports. She was given resources, the best rifles, the best intelligence, blank checks for equipment, and one simple directive: keep American operators alive, regardless of what the mission brief said. She'd saved 11 teams in 3 years. Some knew she was there, most never did. The missions blurred together: Kandahar, Mosul, the Syrian border, the mountains of Pakistan where maps had more blank spaces than details. She moved like smoke through terrain that killed trained soldiers, living in the spaces between official operations and acknowledged reality. Her weapon was a heavily modified SR-25, built to her exact specifications. Match-grade barrel, custom trigger, scope that cost more than most cars. She knew every quirk of the rifle, could compensate for wind drift at 1,500 meters in her sleep, had made shots that would make veteran snipers call her a liar. She worked alone, always. The lesson from Syria had been carved too deep. Teams were vulnerabilities, people you could lose, weights that would drag you down when everything went wrong. But she listened to every frequency, monitored every operation in her area of operations, and when she heard that desperation in Commander Brennan's voice, that same edge of abandonment she'd heard in her own throat years ago, something shifted. She checked her rifle, calculated the distance to the canyon, and started moving. No one had ordered her to intervene. No one would thank her afterward. It didn't matter. Those SEALs weren't going to die alone. The ridgeline was 1,200 meters from the canyon floor. Sarah covered the first 312 minutes, moving through terrain that would have taken most soldiers an hour to navigate. She knew this mountain, had studied it for 3 days while supposedly on leave in Kabul. She'd memorized every fold of ground, every cluster of rocks, every approach vector that might someday matter. Preparation wasn't paranoia when it kept you breathing. The sun was setting, painting the rocks in shades of copper and shadow, good for concealment, bad for shooting. The temperature was dropping fast, mountain cold that would affect ballistics. Add another variable to calculations that already included wind, elevation, and the fact that she was about to engage targets from a position that barely qualified as stable. She low-crawled the last 100 meters, ignoring the rocks that dug into her elbows and knees. Pain was just information. Right now, the only information that mattered was the sound of gunfire echoing from the canyon below, increasing in intensity, which meant the enemy was preparing their final push. A patrol passed 15 meters to her left. 3 men, armed with AK-47 seconds, moving with the casual confidence of hunters who knew their prey was trapped. She remained absolutely still, breathing shallow, heart rate controlled through sheer discipline. They passed without noticing the shape pressed into the rocks that could have been just another shadow. When they were gone, she continued up. The shooting position she'd selected 3 days ago was a natural shelf of rock, concealed by an overhang, with a clear view down into the canyon. She reached it with 2 minutes to spare before the light would shift wrong. She set up fast, rifle deployed on its bipod, spare magazines within easy reach, rangefinder confirming distances she already knew by heart. The SR-25 settled against her shoulder like an extension of her own body, familiar and deadly. Through her scope, the canyon materialized in sharp detail. She counted the SEAL team first. 7 men, 1 clearly wounded. They'd formed a defensive triangle behind insufficient cover, conserving ammunition, waiting for the inevitable. Good discipline. They'd last another 5 minutes, maybe 10 if they were lucky. Then she counted the enemy, started at 23 visible targets, revised up to 28, finally settled on 32 when she spotted the command element hanging back near the ridgeline opposite her position. They were well-trained, coordinated, using proper fire and movement tactics, not the usual insurgent rabble. The range to the nearest target was 1,180 meters. Far, but well within her capabilities. Wind was gusting from the west at approximately 8 miles per hour, slightly quartering. Temperature had dropped to 62 degrees. She made the mental calculations automatically, adjustments that had become instinct after thousands of rounds fired in conditions from Arctic cold to desert heat. She keyed her radio, using the encrypted frequency she'd pulled from NSA intercepts. Razor 1, this is Shadow Viper. I have eyes on your position. The response came quick, disbelieving. Viper? You're real? Hold your position, Commander. I'm going to work. She took a breath, released it halfway, let her body settle into perfect stillness. Her finger rested on the trigger, applying the first stage of pressure. 3.5 pounds of pull separated life and death. The crosshairs centered on the first target, an enemy fighter directing others from behind a boulder on the canyon rim. She squeezed. The SR-25 cracked once. The sound echoed off the canyon walls, indistinguishable from the dozens of other shots filling the air. The enemy commander's head snapped back. He dropped like a puppet with cut strings, his body sliding down the rock face. The men around him barely noticed one more sound in the chaos. One man down when they had 30 more. But Commander Brennan noticed. Through the scope, Sarah saw him risk a glance toward the ridgeline, trying to locate the source of the shot. She keyed the radio again, voice calm despite her heart rate climbing with combat adrenaline. Commander, I'm on the western ridge, 1,200 meters out. I have overwatch. When I clear your immediate threats, you move your wounded back toward the insertion point. Don't wait for my signal. You'll know when it's time. Roger that, Viper. We have 1 critical, 2 walking wounded. Graves took shrapnel to the torso. Sarah adjusted her aim. The enemy was starting to mass for their final assault, convinced the isolated sniper shot was random. They were gathering in clusters, tactically sound when facing targets in the canyon, tactically suicidal when facing a precision rifle from elevation. She selected her next target, a man with an RPG launcher, positioning himself for a clear shot at the SEAL position. He was partially concealed behind rocks, only his upper torso visible. Range, 1,205 meters. Wind had picked up slightly, now gusting to 10 miles per hour. She compensated, aimed 18 inches left and 6 inches high, exhaled slowly, squeezed. The RPG gunner collapsed. The launcher clattered down the rocks, unexploded rockets scattering. Now they noticed. Shouts echoed up from the canyon. Men scrambled for better cover, searching for the threat, but they were searching in the wrong direction, focused on the opposite ridgeline where muzzle flash might be visible. Sarah's position was perfect. The overhang concealed her, the setting sun was behind her, and she was far enough back from the edge that even her muzzle flash would be difficult to spot. She worked the bolt, chambering another round. The spent casing ejected with a metallic clink. Target 3, a man directing others, clearly an experienced squad leader. He was smart, staying low, using hand signals instead of shouting. Range, 1,190 meters. He moved between rocks with practiced efficiency, making himself a difficult target. Sarah waited. Patience was the sniper's greatest weapon. 3 seconds, 5, 8. He paused to check his radio. Half a second of stillness. She fired. The bullet caught him in the upper chest. He went down hard, and this time the men around him reacted with panic. They'd lost 3 leaders in less than 2 minutes, all from an invisible shooter. Viper, we see them breaking formation. Brennan's voice carried relief mixed with disbelief. You just dropped their command element. 4 more shots and you'll have a corridor. Be ready to move. She was already selecting target 4, a machine gunner who'd been pouring fire into the SEAL position, his weapon doing the most damage. He was behind solid cover, only his head and shoulders visible when he rose to fire. Sarah centered the crosshairs on the spot where his head would appear, waited. He rose. She fired. The canyon was changing from execution ground to killing field, and the SEALs had just become the hunters. The enemy finally understood they were facing a sniper. Shouts echoed across the canyon in Pashto, orders to find cover, to locate the shooter. But understanding the threat and countering it were different problems. Sarah had already shifted position, sliding 3 meters to her right where another natural depression in the rocks provided cover. She settled in, rifle deployed, and continued the systematic elimination. Target 5 was attempting to organize a retreat. She put a round through his center mass at 1,215 meters. The man spun and fell, and the organized retreat became a panicked scramble. "Moving now," Brennan's voice cracked through the radio. Through her scope, Sarah saw the SEAL team beginning their extract, Chief Aldridge and Petty Officer Hutchinson supporting the wounded corpsman between them. The others provided covering fire. But they were moving, that's what mattered. Target 6 tried to track the retreating SEALs with an AK-47. Sarah's bullet arrived first, dropping him before he could fire. The suppression was working. Every few seconds, another enemy fighter went down, and the survivors were more concerned with staying alive than pursuing their targets. But then the situation changed. A bullet cracked past Sarah's position, impacting the rock 6 inches from her head. Stone fragments peppered her face, drawing blood. She didn't flinch. Flinching got you killed. Instead, she immediately low-crawled backward, abandoning her position. "They've got a sniper," she transmitted, voice tight. "I'm compromised." She'd known it would happen eventually. These weren't amateurs. They'd brought their own marksman, and he'd finally triangulated her muzzle flash. Now it was a different kind of fight. Sarah moved to a position 20 meters north, a cluster of boulders that provided overhead cover. She'd scouted this spot too, planned for exactly this contingency. Through her scope, she searched for the enemy sniper. There, on the opposite ridge, partially concealed in a natural hide. Good position, good discipline. He was scanning methodically, searching for her new location. His rifle was a Dragunov SVD, Russian-made, accurate to 800 meters in trained hands. At this range, they were evenly matched. He found her first. His bullet struck the boulder 3 feet to her left, a probing shot to confirm her position. She didn't return fire. That's what he wanted, a muzzle flash to target. Instead, she waited, controlling her breathing, analyzing the situation. He was in shadow, but there was a gap in his cover, a space about 4 inches wide where the rocks didn't quite meet. If he shifted to get a better angle on her position, he'd expose himself through that gap. 20 seconds passed. 30. The gunfire in the canyon had decreased. The SEALs were moving. The enemy was focused on the dual threats. The enemy sniper shifted. Just a small movement, adjusting his position to track where he thought she might move. His shoulder appeared in the gap. Sarah fired. The bullet passed through the 4-inch opening and struck true. The enemy sniper's rifle fell from his position, clattering down the rocks. "Sniper down," she transmitted. "Continue your extract." But the fight wasn't over. She'd eliminated 9 targets, but more than 20 remained, and they were regrouping. The SEALs had made it 50 meters up the canyon, but they were still exposed, still vulnerable. Sarah moved again, seeking a new angle. The sun had fully set now, and darkness was her ally. She activated her night vision scope, and the canyon materialized in green-tinted clarity. The enemy was gathering for one final push. Time to make them regret it. The enemy's counter-assault came fast and coordinated. 23 remaining fighters split into 3 elements, 1 to pursue the SEALs, 2 to advance on Sarah's position. They'd recognized she was the real threat. Sarah watched them come through her night vision scope. They moved with military precision, using proper bounding overwatch techniques. Former Afghan National Army, she guessed, or maybe Pakistani Special Forces. Whoever they were, they knew their business. She'd prepared for this too. Before taking her shooting position, she'd placed 3 claymore mines along the likely approaches to her ridge. Remote detonated, positioned to cover the dead ground where attackers would naturally advance. Now she held the detonators in her left hand, rifle steady in her right, watching the enemy close the distance. The lead element reached the first kill zone. 12 men, bunched too close together in their eagerness to reach her position. She thumbed the first detonator. The claymore erupted in a horizontal spray of ball bearings, devastating the lead element. Men screamed, dropped, scattered. The survivors went to ground, suddenly cautious. But the second element was already advancing from a different angle. Sarah shifted her aim, began engaging them with precision fire. 1 shot, 1 target, mechanical efficiency. She'd practiced magazine changes until they were muscle memory reload time under 2 seconds, weapon back in action before the enemy could capitalize. A bullet struck her backpack, punching through gear. Another sparked off her rifle's scope mount, so close she felt the heat. They were getting her range, walking fire onto her position. She activated the second claymore. Another blast. Another element disrupted. "Viper, we're at the extraction point." Brennan's voice carried over the radio. "Helicopter is inbound, 2 minutes." "Roger. Keep your heads down." But the third element had reached her flank. She heard them before she saw them, boots scraping rock, the metallic click of weapons being readied. 4 men, maybe 5, climbing to her position from the south. Too close for the rifle. She rolled away from her shooting position, came up with her sidearm, a Glock 19, suppressed. The first man crested the ridge, and she put 2 rounds in his chest before he could raise his weapon. The second man was faster, got a burst off that went wide as her bullets found him. The third man got close enough to swing his rifle like a club. She ducked under it, drove her knife into his thigh, kicked his leg out from under him. He went down screaming, and she silenced him with a mercy shot, quick, professional. The fourth man was smarter. He'd taken cover, was calling for support. She could hear more men coming up the slope. Time to leave. She grabbed her rifle, slung it across her back, and ran along the ridgeline. Not retreat, reposition. She had one more prepared position, 200 meters north, with a clear view of both the canyon and her current position. Behind her, the enemy reached her abandoned spot, found nothing but spent brass and empty claymore positions. They'd been fighting a ghost, and ghosts didn't stay to be caught. Sarah reached her final position, set up the rifle, controlled her breathing. The SEALs were loading onto their helicopter now, the bird's rotors visible in her night vision, almost safe. But the enemy still had one RPG team, lining up a shot on the helicopter. Not today. The RPG gunner was 1,340 meters away, partially concealed behind a boulder on the canyon rim. Sarah could see him through her scope, adjusting the launcher, calculating the lead on the helicopter, preparing to send an explosive-tipped rocket into the bird full of wounded SEALs. Straight shot was impossible. The boulder covered everything except the top 6 inches of the launcher tube. She'd need to hit a target 4 inches wide at nearly a mile, while the helicopter's rotor wash was creating unpredictable wind patterns across the canyon. She had maybe 8 seconds before he fired. Sarah's mind shifted into the cold clarity that came in impossible moments. She'd made difficult shots before through vehicle windows at moving targets, between obstacles that shouldn't have allowed passage, in wind conditions that made every instructor she'd ever had shake their heads. This was different. This required thinking like the bullet itself, understanding physics at an instinctive level. The boulder had a crack running through it, a natural fissure she could see clearly through her scope. Not much, maybe 2 inches wide at the top, narrowing to nothing halfway down. But there was a gap in the rock face about 15 meters to the gunner's left, a broken section where a previous explosion had shattered the stone into reflective fragments. She calculated the geometry instantly. Not a straight shot, a ricochet. Hit the reflective rock face at the correct angle, let the bullet deflect through the crack in the boulder, emerge on the other side where the gunner was exposed. It was insane. Bullets didn't behave predictably after impacts. The deflection would alter the trajectory, reduce velocity, potentially fragment the round entirely. Every sniper instructor in the world would call it impossible. Sarah loaded a special round solid copper, designed to maintain integrity through barriers. She'd packed 5 of them for exactly this kind of situation. Range to the reflective surface, 1,190 meters. Angle of deflection, approximately 37 degrees. Wind, gusting, chaotic from the helicopter's rotors. Temperature, dropping fast as night settled. She aimed at a specific point on the rock face, a section where the stone's angle would provide the best deflection. Her mind processed variables faster than conscious thought: trajectory, deflection angle, final destination, probability of success. 5% chance, maybe less, but 0% if she didn't try. The RPG gunner steadied his launcher. 4 seconds until he fired. Sarah exhaled slowly, found the space between heartbeats, squeezed the trigger. The SR-25 cracked. Through her scope, she watched the bullet strike the reflective rock face, exactly where she'd aimed. Sparks flew. The round deflected, angled through the darkness, vanished into the crack in the boulder. For a moment, nothing. Had it fragmented? Deflected wrong? Then the RPG gunner jerked backward, the launcher tumbling from his hands. The rocket fired wild, streaking up into the night sky, before exploding harmlessly 200 meters above the canyon. Holy Brennan's voice was pure shock. "Viper, how did you?" Sarah didn't answer. She was already tracking the remaining enemies, providing final covering fire as the helicopter lifted off, banking hard away from the canyon. The SEALs were safe. Mission accomplished. But she wasn't done. 6 enemy fighters were still moving up the ridgeline toward her position, and they were close. She had 30 seconds, maybe less, before they'd be on top of her. She fired 4 more rounds, dropping the lead elements, then shouldered her rifle and ran. The darkness swallowed her, and behind her, the enemy found another empty position, more spent brass, more proof that they'd been fighting something they couldn't catch. Shadow Viper was already gone, moving through terrain that would kill unprepared soldiers, heading for an extraction point that existed only in her head. Sarah had covered 300 meters when she heard the helicopters. Not the SEAL extraction bird, these were enemy assets. 2 Russian-made Mi-17 seconds, their rotors thundering as they swept over the ridgeline, searchlights cutting through the darkness. They'd called in reinforcements. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. They wanted her captured, wanted to know who'd killed 30 of their fighters in a single engagement. She went to ground in a shallow depression, covered herself with her ghillie cloak, a patchwork of local vegetation and earth-toned fabric that made her virtually invisible from the air. The helicopters passed overhead, searchlights sweeping across rocks that revealed nothing. But men were fast roping down, 12 new fighters hitting the ground with military precision. They spread out immediately, night vision goggles glowing green in the darkness, weapons ready. Professional hunter teams. Sarah keyed her emergency beacon, a single encrypted burst that would reach JSOC and nobody else. Shadow Viper, alive, hostile contact, coordinates attached, no extraction requested. The last part was important. She didn't want a rescue team walking into this mess. She'd gotten herself into this situation. She'd get herself out. The enemy teams were using proper search patterns, moving in coordinated pairs, checking every fold of ground. They had thermal optics. She could see the distinctive profile of FLIR scanners. Her ghillie cloak would help, but body heat was body heat. She needed to move, but movement meant exposure. Then she saw her opportunity. The 2 helicopter crews had remained at their landing zone, maintaining security while their ground teams searched. Standard procedure, but it meant the pilots and door gunners were stationary targets. If she eliminated the helicopters, the ground teams would be stranded, forced to call for new extraction, giving her time to escape in the confusion. Sarah low-crawled 70 meters to a new position, a cluster of rocks that provided concealment and a clear view of the landing zone. Range, 890 meters. Both helicopters sat side by side, rotors still turning, crews visible inside. She aimed at the first helicopter's fuel tank. A shot that would normally be suicidal, shooting at aviation fuel, was a good way to start a fire you couldn't control. But she was upwind, with 200 meters of rock between her and the target. She fired. The bullet punched through the thin aluminum skin and struck something critical. Fuel began spraying, a fine mist catching the moonlight. The pilots noticed immediately, scrambling to shut down engines. But Sarah was already targeting the second helicopter. Same shot, same result. Within 30 seconds, both birds were grounded, fuel pooling beneath them, crews evacuating in controlled panic. The ground teams heard the commotion, began converging on the landing zone. That was fine. Sarah was already moving again, using the distraction to put another 100 meters between herself and her pursuers. She moved through the darkness like smoke, using every skill earned through years of operating alone in hostile territory. The night was her ally, the mountains her home. She knew this terrain, knew every approach and escape route, every hiding spot and kill zone. Behind her, the enemy search teams were discovering what every other unit that had hunted Shadow Viper eventually learned. You didn't find her, she found you. And if she didn't want to be found, you were chasing shadows and spent brass while she disappeared into terrain that swallowed armies. Dawn was still 4 hours away. By then, she'd be 20 miles from here, leaving nothing behind but questions and casualties. Sarah reached the emergency cache at 0300 hours. It was hidden in a cave she'd scouted 6 weeks earlier, during a supply run that officially never happened. Inside, civilian clothes, forged identification papers, cash in 3 currencies, a motorcycle with paperwork that would pass casual inspection. She stripped off her tactical gear, buried it under rocks along with the SR-25, The rifle hurt to leave behind. It had been her constant companion through 3 years of ghost operations, but it was too distinctive, too military. The cache had a breakdown Remington 700 hunting rifle, perfectly legal, perfectly innocent. She changed into local clothing, loose pants, long tunic, headscarf, applied makeup to lighten her skin tone, added dust to her face and hands. In the cave's darkness, Captain Sarah Blackwood, Shadow Viper, ceased to exist. What emerged was Nadia Khalil, a Pakistani journalist returning from an assignment in the mountains. The motorcycle started on the first kick. She rode toward the Pakistani border, taking back roads that wound through valleys where government authority was more theory than practice. By sunrise, she'd crossed 3 district boundaries and become invisible in the flow of daily traffic. The enemy would search for her. They'd question locals, investigate every suspicious person within 50 miles. They'd find nothing. The woman they sought had vanished like morning fog, leaving behind only the memory of 30 dead fighters and 7 SEALs who should have died but didn't. She reached Peshawar by noon, abandoned the motorcycle at a prearranged location, and walked into an internet cafe. She had one message to send, routed through enough proxies and encryption layers that NSA analysts would give up tracing it after hitting the 14th dead end. The message was simple, sent to a JSOC email address that officially didn't exist. Shadow Viper confirms. Razor 1 complete extraction, 0 friendly casualties, 32 enemy KIA. 2 helicopters disabled. Returning to standby status. Next deployment coordinates requested. She sent it, deleted the browsing history, paid in cash, and walked back into the street. The city swallowed her, just another woman in a headscarf among thousands, unremarkable, unmemorable. 3 days later, she was in Dubai. 5 days after that, back in the United States, through a military transport that had no manifest and filed no flight plan. She returned to the small apartment in Virginia that she technically didn't live in, with furniture she'd never chosen and bills paid by accounts that didn't have her name attached. There was a package waiting. Inside, a new identity card, fresh deployment orders encrypted on a thumb drive, and a photograph. 7 SEALs posed together, grins wide, arms around each other's shoulders. Commander Brennan held a piece of paper with 4 words written in marker. "Thank you, Shadow Viper." Sarah studied the photograph for a long moment, memorizing their faces. 7 men who would go home to families, who would live because she'd been in the right place, made the right shots, calculated the impossible geometry of a ricochet that shouldn't have worked. She placed the photograph in a drawer with 6 others. Different teams, different operations, same message. Proof that she was still saving people, still making amends for the team she couldn't save. The drawer closed. Sarah Blackwood went to the window and watched the city move past, anonymous among millions. The after-action report filed by Lieutenant Commander Jake Brennan was a masterpiece of creative omission. It detailed the ambush, the casualty count, the successful extraction. It mentioned effective sniper support from unidentified friendly assets operating in the area. The intelligence officers who debriefed the team pressed for details. Who was the sniper? What unit? How did they coordinate the support? Brennan maintained the same answer: unknown. They identified as Shadow Viper, provided covering fire, disappeared after extraction. We never made visual contact. It was technically true. He'd never seen her face. None of them had. The intelligence report noted 32 enemy casualties, pattern consistent with precision rifle fire. Forensics on recovered bullets matched custom-loaded 7.62mm rounds, similar to ammunition used by Tier 1 sniper units but with peculiarities that suggested private manufacture. The shooter demonstrated expert-level marksmanship, including one shot that ballistics experts initially flagged as impossible, a ricochet kill at 1,300+ meters. The file was classified secret, no foreign, then bumped to top secret, SCI. When a junior analyst noticed the call sign Shadow Viper appeared in 7 other incident reports spanning 3 years, always the same pattern. American units, in desperate situations, miraculous precision fire from unknown sources, 0 casualties among friendlies. The analyst tried to follow the thread. Who was Shadow Viper? What unit did they belong to? Why wasn't there any official record? The investigation was shut down within 12 hours. A senior officer from JSOC personally visited the analyst's supervisor, had a brief conversation behind closed doors, and the matter was dropped. The analyst was reassigned to a desk job in Kansas, analyzing satellite imagery of North Korean missile sites. The 7 SEALs returned to their teams. They didn't talk about Shadow Viper except among themselves. Late at night, when the conversation drifted to close calls and lucky breaks, they knew what they owed. They knew they were alive because someone who didn't exist had decided their lives mattered more than protocol or orders or the convenient fiction of official records. Corpsman Tyler Graves recovered from his wounds, returned to duty 6 months later. He had a daughter born 3 weeks after the mission. They named her Sarah. For no reason, he explained to his wife, beyond someone who saved my life. Chief Petty Officer Marcus Aldridge retired 2 years later, opened a construction business in Colorado. He hired veterans, gave them second chances, and every year on the anniversary of that mission, he donated to organizations supporting wounded warriors. The donations were anonymous, signed only Shadow Viper. Commander Jake Brennan made Admiral. In his office at the Pentagon, behind his desk where only he could see it, hung a photograph. 7 men, 1 piece of paper, 4 words of gratitude to a ghost. In the JSOC headquarters, in a vault 3 levels below ground, there existed a folder marked with a classification above top secret. Inside were reports of missions that never officially happened, operations conducted by personnel who weren't on any roster. And on the cover of that folder, written in red ink, Shadow Viper, active asset, do not investigate. The file was 5 inches thick and growing thicker every year. Somewhere, in a small apartment that officially belonged to someone else, Sarah Blackwood cleaned her rifle and waited for the next deployment. The work wasn't finished. It would never be finished. There would always be another team in another canyon, another desperate voice on the radio, another impossible shot that had to be made. She was ready. The ghost was always ready.